every time that I take a deeper look into K-pop, I feel like I'm on a bullet train, hurtling 200 miles an hour, trying to catch up to locomotives that have been on the same path since the 50s. K-pop constantly feels like it's trying to play catch-up, as if it wants to be bigger and faster than anything and anyone else around it, while still being too scared to ever truly pull ahead. So much as blink nowadays and you'll miss the latest trend. Everything seems to move so quickly. Every day there's a new group, another one is gone. Even K-pop itself can't quite seem to keep up with the pace that it's set. Everything in K-pop has an expiration date, and while that might have benefited them early on, it now seems to slowly eat away at them from the inside. Sometimes it feels like companies are having to choose between two popular and well-loved groups, and that's a choice that should have never had to happen in the first place. K-pop has made time its weapon, but it will also be the sword that stabs it in the back. While pop music as we know it today arguably didn't start until the 70s or 80s, pop music first became a term in the 1950s to describe rock and roll, which was an emerging genre at the time in the West. However, this was a genre that South Korea skipped almost as a whole. In fact, the country tried everything that they could to keep rock from becoming a prevailing genre, even going as far as to imprison and torture Shin Jung-hyun, who was known as Korea's godfather of rock, and is credited with creating Korea's first rock band, whose music would later be officially banned for nearly 10 years. Without the influence of this iconic genre in their music, Korea's music feels very different from the West at this point in time. That was until the 80s and 90s, where hip-hop and R&B influences took over both scenes. This is also where K-pop as we know it today was first introduced to us by a group called Seoul Taiji and Boys. While this group did bring something new to Korea's music scene, it was also very reminiscent of sounds in the West, incorporating rap and hip-hop with the ever-dreaded genre of rock mixed in between. However, while acts in the past were seen as rebellious and cruel to attempt these new and foreign sounds, luckily, Seoul Taiji and Boys, as well as the others that came after them, were praised for their outside-of-the-box thinking. And ever since then, K-pop has performed nearly the same way, constantly incorporating new ideas a beat later than the West. And while K-pop has had their fair share of unique concepts and ideas, and taking influence from other artists isn't necessarily a bad thing, it is one of the reasons why K-pop feels like it's constantly trying to play catch-up. Skipping an entire era of music only to dive headfirst into modern pop at the snap of the fingers was a bold move, and one that has paid off, but at the price of falling victim to time itself. One of the most notable differences between K-pop in the Western world is the pace at which most K-pop groups release new music. While EPs and singles have become a prominent in most musical genres thanks to platforms like TikTok elevating certain artists' music practically overnight, K-pop has a really bad habit of substituting full albums for singles and minis. And while K-pop's individual albums may have a smaller catalog, some of its artists have a larger list of songs than others who have been making music for years. K-pop is constantly releasing new music. I dare you to find a single day out of the year where no group or artist is having a comeback. This constant pace just ends up hurting everyone in the long run. Bigger artists that have the ability to quickly release new music in concession become burnt out and easily tired, and smaller artists are blocked from even getting a chance to have their music heard because of all of the major releases happening in just 1 month. There used to be a fairly common occurrence where smaller K-pop groups who know they can't compete with bigger artists will move their releases a week or two later if a big artist announces their release at the same time. And yet, that is something that I haven't heard of in years, simply because there just isn't a day anymore where somebody with a bigger name and influence than the other isn't releasing something. Music gets forgotten easier and easier now, and not just because the music is worse, but simply because there's always a shiny new toy that comes far too quickly. Here are just some of the more extreme examples that I can think of off the top of my head just to put things more into perspective. In 2017, Twice had 5 different releases between the regular releases as well as Japanese albums, as well as another 7 in the following year, not including repackages or Japanese versions of their songs. While admittedly they are a newer group with a smaller discography, P1harmony released over half of their discography in the last year, 2 years after their debut. While DKZ were still promoting as donkeys, the day after J-Chan's and Munich subunit promotions were over, they were posting teasers for their comeback as a group. Stray Kids have over 200 songs to their name, only including official releases, all released in just over 6 years, not to mention about 50 more that they have re-recorded between Stray Kids 2020 and 2021. To put that into perspective, Taylor Swift has just over 400 songs, including compilation albums and re-recordings, spanning from 2006 to 2023. Nearly 20 years now, and Stray Kids is on track to double that in the same amount of time. I say all this to say that even with the West putting more emphasis on EPs and singles for the same reason that K-pop is, for some reason K-pop hasn't taken the hit that they are still doing twice as much as these other artists, effectively painting a very fast-paced war zone in their home territory. K-pop's more manufactured image that its artists have is actually a focal point of the genre. It's something that makes it stand out, and some of their training procedures and regimens are unmatched. However, once again, one of its greatest achievements has become its downfall. Every group's debut date also sets a possible day of death. The 7-year contract is such a well-known thing by this point that by day 1, people are already counting down the days until the end. And while contracts are a necessity for any form of business such as this, K-pop's manufactured and fast-paced environment keeps well-established groups from wanting to re-sign and continue with their careers as they know it. It may be becoming a bit more common with groups like Dreamcatcher and even Card re-signing with their companies in the past couple of years, but for the most part, only very large and established groups even get a choice in the matter, and even then, very few decide to stick around. While other artists outside of K-pop can switch from label to label without some fans even noticing, when a group leaves their company, even just to join a new one, it's a huge deal that is talked about by many. Putting any sort of timetable on an artist's career is already setting them up for failure. Unfortunately, many, if not all, artists' careers rely heavily on their company's input and status. A group that could have gone on for 20 years is stuck at 7 simply because the company didn't want to re-sign them, and an artist whose career was only worth 3 years has to remain stuck in this contract, unable to release new music or even leave the company without facing a fee. It's a vicious cycle that many get stuck in and is once again fueled by time itself. Yet another big issue that seems to plague K-pop in recent time is an idol's age. Whether young or old, no matter where they may be in their life, their age is sure to be a topic of discussion. Young artists is yet another issue that isn't something that is necessarily unique to K-pop, but it is yet another issue that is tied into time itself. Idols just seem to get younger and younger with each and every year, and even on the off chance that there is a group that debuts with all adult members, it's likely that some of the members of the group were either publicly known trainees or even debuted in a group prior to the one that they are in now. Not to mention, K-pop companies are getting less and less subtle with their artists' ages, some even going as far as to promote them as young idols. P1harmony was quite literally promoted by FNC as the youngest active K-pop group at the time of their debut. When they debuted, 3 out of 6 of the members were underage, including Jungsob, who debuted with P1harmony at only 14 years old, after training with YG for a few years, as well as participating with their survival show at just 12. And I won't even get into his history in the industry prior to even joining YG. This is something that the boys have talked about themselves.
When we first debuted, we were like the new record of the youngest K-pop group out.
And they're not the only ones to do it either. I specifically remember whenever Ghost9 debuted around the same time that they did something similar, using the group's quote-unquote average age at around 17 years old to promote the group. Mind you, this is the group that debuted after Teen Teen's project group under the same company, where all of the members were just 14 to 15 years old. And after all 3 members of said group were promoting on Produce's last season, Wichin and Jinwoo, as well as former member Taesung, have been constantly in and out of the industry since they were as young as 11 to 12 years old. And yet, the company still had the nerve to announce this to the world by promoting them by their age rather than with their music. Companies are literally using an idol's age as a jumping off point to start their careers. There's an apparent lack of shame and humiliation in using these young idols' ages to their advantage. Even whenever it comes to girl groups like Newjeans and the Sserafim, the members' ages garnered attention amongst fans, which then led to the group gaining traction. All the while, the company didn't have to stick their neck out like FNC and Maru did to get said attention. This is harmful to these young idols for obvious reasons, including having people flock to these groups simply based on how young some of the members may be, setting them up for failure when they inevitably age. Which leads me to my next point, that this can also seriously harm older idols too. With the emphasis being on younger idols, a big part of K-pop right now is focusing on a younger audience by using these younger idols to promote to them. Trainees that are still waiting to debut, as well as already debuted idols that hadn't quite carved out their place in the industry for them yet, are both suffering due to the sudden change in tactics. There are just quite frankly too many cases of trainees being basically told to go fuck themselves just because they are no longer a teenager. And if you're looking for a good example, look no farther than survival shows. By this point, these programs may as well be allowing older trainees on the program just to be their own personal punching bags. Too many times has an older trainee been allowed to participate on the show only to be told by fans and judges alike that they are too old to debut with the group. The two most recent examples I can think of being Kepler's Newjeans, who was called out multiple times for being, 24 at the time that the show started airing, as well as Hui, who was arguably a rather established idol and even music producer, also being called too old to debut in a new group and effectively blocking him from debuting with the final lineup. It's a ridiculous notion, but unfortunately one that is very common. Idols in their mid to late 20s are considered old, all while still being in the prime of their lives, and yet all it is yet another instance of K-pop battling time once more. K-pop can be a wonderful and rather diverse genre at times. It stands out because of its discrepancies with other modern music of today, and yet, for some reason, the longer it goes on, the more it feels like it wants to fit in with the herd. K-pop wasn't made to be like the modern pop scene, where the top artists right now have been doing this for 15 plus years. It made sacrifices that led to it being an extremely fast-paced and cutthroat environment. Sacrifices that made the genre unique, but also inevitably sat it on a track that has been run time and time again by others before. And it stays merely picking up the pieces that others have left behind, constantly outrunning everyone and yet remaining in last place. At first, my tagline of this video was, K-pop will be the fastest music genre from start to finish. But after reflection, I don't think that's true. K-pop may be running twice as fast as everyone around them, but I don't think it's heading towards a broken track. I don't think K-pop is ever going to be a leader in music. I think it'll continue to simply perfect what others have done before, because that's its thing. K-pop is great at picking up broken pieces and mending them back together to make something even greater than what it was before. As long as music as we know it remains, K-pop will always be one step behind, doing the same thing but in its own way with its own colors. Who knows? Maybe it will win against time itself.